Welcome back, and welcome to those of us who are joining us this morning. My name is Amanda McMillan. I'm President and CEO of United Way of Greater Houston. Glad to welcome you all back. Well, we're all here with water not just in bottles, but everywhere in the building. For those of you who were here yesterday, hooray! And now you know where all the backup restrooms are. Well, we're thrilled to be back here today for the second day of our Economic Mobility Summit. United Way of Greater Houston, we focus every day on bringing partners together to help our neighbors land on their feet and stay there. And financial stability is, in fact, our North Star for that work. And that's one of the reasons we were so grateful to be able to convene with our incredible partners for this summit, because it's really all about creating a shared understanding and a sense of purpose to kind of tackle the complex and multifaceted ways in which we can ensure economic mobility across our community. And if there's one community I know that can do this, it's Greater Houston. We are a city of doers, and I'm so grateful to be part of it. Now, in order to achieve this, there's a lot we have to do. We must rely on each other's strengths. We must work across sectors and make the long-term commitment it is going to take to chart a prosperous future for all. At United Way, we're focused on this for our neighbors who are experiencing ALICE, which I will not ask you to recite in unison with me, but I think many of you know what that means: asset limited, income constrained, employed. Earning wages above the federal poverty line, but still struggling to cover the basics from month to month. We support an incredible network of almost 100 partners, many of whom are in the room today. And we're all woven together to create what we call the integrated client journey, which is designed to remove barriers and bring together the services people need on their journey to financial security, whether that's employment and training support, financial coaching, early childhood and youth development, affordable health care, and support with basic needs and legal services. Through the integrated client journey, we are revolutionizing the service delivery across our region. We're making it easier and easier for individuals to access multiple services, connect with a navigator to set goals, and access services in support of their goals, or, as of tomorrow, connect through our self-service portal to create their goals, access services, and track progress on their own time whenever and wherever they have the ability to do so. However a person chooses to engage, we're here to support them on their pathway to financial stability. Yesterday, we had the incredible opportunity to hear from Dr. Chetty on economic mobility through a multi-generational lens, and how where you live and the social networks you share can have an impact on your economic mobility. I hope everyone had the opportunity to connect with new people during the networking session yesterday evening. And this morning, I have the immense pleasure of introducing Sarah Rosen Wartell. Sarah has led the Urban Institute since 2012. And if you aren't already familiar with the incredible work that the Urban Institute does, they are a nonprofit research organization that drives impact by equipping changemakers with evidence and solutions to create a future where every person in every community has the opportunity and the power to thrive. It serves as a trusted source for individuals who seek to strengthen decision-making, create inclusive economic growth, and improve the well-being of families and communities. Since 1968, Urban Institute has delivered facts that inspire solutions, and that remains their charge today. Before joining the Urban Institute, Sarah did a few other things. I'll run through a couple of those. That's a lot. She was a founding chief operating officer and then executive vice president of the Center for American Progress, where her work focused on economic policy, and she was deputy director of the National Economic Council at the White House. At the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development from 1993 to 1998, Sarah advised the Federal Housing Commissioner on housing finance, mortgage markets, and consumer protection. She was later a consultant to the Bipartisan Millennial Housing Commission. And before her government service, Wartell practiced law with the Washington, D.C. firm of Arnold and Porter, which has an incredible nonprofit practice, by the way. Sarah serves on several boards and steering committees. Her areas of expertise include economic mobility, community development, consumer finance, and asset building, all incredibly relevant to the work we're doing together today. Sarah has an AB with honors in urban affairs from the Princeton School of Public and International Affairs, a JD from Yale Law School, fellow recovering lawyer, and an honorary doctorate of public service from the University of Maryland, Baltimore. Let's please give a warm welcome to Sarah.
So the first thing I've learned is I need to make sure that we send a shorter version of my bio to places that I'm speaking. Look, I am so excited and thrilled to be here, and actually thrilled for all of you that you've chosen to spend your time here today. I was going to tell you a minute about the Urban Institute, but I don't need to now. But I want to just emphasize one thing. We have, through that long history, always been a trusted source for evidence, research, and data. But increasingly, we're trying to do more than that. And we're about trying to help change makers, which is what I would describe every single person in this room as, to use fact-based, evidence-driven data to decide how they want to pursue their own objectives. And in this case, I think we'll talk about economic mobility. I've been so impressed by the commitment that I have seen in this room from so many people to try to work together to improve mobility outcomes in your communities. And I hope that some of what I'm going to share now will be helpful to you as you begin, hopefully, on that journey. Yesterday, Dr. Chetty presented some transformational research that has galvanized communities from Charlotte to Seattle to work together collaboratively to provide a brighter future for their children. And I hope it proves to be galvanizing here too. At Urban, we were inspired by Raj's, I would say, chilling findings and other mobility research. And so we set out, with the support of the Gates Foundation over 10 years ago, to start to help communities find evidence-based solutions to create better mobility outcomes, to change the story that his research was telling. And I'll talk today about specifically 3 aspects of the work we've done over those last 10 years that I hope will be building blocks, tools that you can draw upon. First, we developed a framework for understanding how to begin to tackle the problem of mobility, and I'll talk about the intellectual underpinnings of that framework. Second, we provided a range of different data-driven tools, including the Mobility Metrics Dashboard, and I'll just briefly show you it. I don't want to totally geek out. But it's a tool that helps place-based collaborations develop strategies that target their community's highest needs, measure their community's own progress, and help to hold each other accountable. Finally, we've been working with over hundreds of different communities around the country who are on these journeys around mobility, around ALICE, around lots of different objectives. And we have learned a lot about what works in other places. And so we have developed tools and best practices and case studies that help people like you, if you embark on this journey together, to learn from lessons of others. I'm also going to share a few examples of a couple of the places that have been on these journeys and how they've customized processes to work for them. This is not a one-size-fits-all exercise. Every community does it in the way that is going to work best for the assets, the needs, and the inspiration of the people who gather together. So let's begin. So Raj started his presentation by saying one of his slides was missing, and I had a version that I was about to pull from my deck, but it turns out I think this is the chart he was looking for. So I put it back in. Simply put, what it says is that there has been a decline in the intergenerational mobility over time, so that children born in the 80s had only a 50-50 shot of earning more than their parents. Now, he did have the slides that tell us just how much those outcomes vary by place. And understanding that the American dream is ephemeral is something that we can look at a chart and try to understand. But most Americans don't need a data-based presentation to feel from their own experience that they have now deep skepticism that hard work is really paying off and leading to a better life. A recent Wall Street Journal NORC poll found that almost 70% of US adults believe that the American dream doesn't hold true anymore and some doubt whether it ever did. And increasingly, people wonder whether maybe that promise is true for somebody else, but not for me and mine and people like me. And I agree with Raj also, and I think this is an important point, with so many Americans living not with confidence for the future, but anxiety, is it any wonder that we see such great distrust in our institutions and the intense polarization that characterizes both the right and the left in America today? So back in 2016, Urban Institute, with support from the Gates Foundation, convened what we called the U.S. Partnership on Mobility from Poverty. And I used to describe it as a group of 26 big brains, one of whom was Dr. Chetty. And it also included scholars, but importantly, innovative practitioners who were working all across the country using different strategies to target poverty. And we tried to learn from both the data and the evidence and the experience of the work. Mobility from poverty has too often been viewed as a matter of individual ability and the degree of hard work. But people experiencing poverty face a web of obstacles that often undermine best efforts. So to tackle a web of obstacles, you need a coordinated and integrated set of strategies. And so the U.S. partnership took a systems approach to working in place. And that's the first thing that I hope you will take away today. I think we are all here because while we work in many different policy silos, we actually are the beginnings, the sort of the seeds of what I would hope is an economic mobility field. If you come from a particular discipline like education or childcare or community development, I come from housing. You heard that I cut my teeth on policy at HUD 3 decades ago. And my own work has aimed to ensure that low-income families are stably housed, that children don't experience homelessness or couch surfing. But I've come to understand in the last 10 years that the reason I've been passionate about that is not because preventing homelessness itself is the goal of my work. Of course, we want to prevent suffering, but actually, I sort of intuitively knew and learned from evidence that growing up with housing instability dramatically reduces the long-term prospects of a child achieving their full potential, and ultimately of our society benefiting from that child's contributions. In the same vein, much of the work I've done in housing has aimed to expand the number of families that have the opportunity to achieve sustainable homeownership. But why do I care? One reason is because home equity, whether this is how you would design the system from scratch or not, it is true in America, home equity is the single greatest source of wealth for most families. And wealth allows you to invest in yourself and your family, in your education, to start a business, for enrichment for your children. In other words, key pathways to economic mobility. So it turns out, while I didn't label myself that, I am a houser because I care about economic mobility, and I want to reverse the trends that Raj has described. And I expect that in some ways, each of you who've worked on all kinds of different anti-poverty strategies over a lifetime are mobility champions too. Even if you focus in a particular domain, we all share a common why. And it matters that we don't just keep plugging along in our specific silo, unaware of the interactions between job training and childcare, or housing and opportunity, as Raj demonstrated. If we're going to find solutions to system problems, we need to orient our efforts not just to the intermediate outcomes in specific domains, but really be asking ourselves, is this moving the needle on long-term mobility impacts that present brighter futures for our communities? So back to the U.S. partnership. With that mindset, we intentionally took a cross-disciplinary approach to the membership and to its work, putting in place not just experts in mobility and practitioners, but also people who work in criminal justice and financial security and safety net programs. And a key element of the partnership's vision of mobility emerged at the very first gathering, which happened in Bed-Stuy neighborhood in May of 2016. The partners started to discuss the myriad ways that they might measure success. And they were trying to think, how would it look in the country if mobility from poverty increased dramatically? But they also asked, how would people's experience of poverty change? One of the partners was an academic from California named John Powell. And he said, poverty is not just about a lack of money, it's about a lack of power. But surprisingly, Powell, who is undoubtedly center-left, let's just say, found immediate common ground with Arthur Brooks, who was also a partner, who was then president of the conservative American Enterprise Institute. Arthur spoke passionately about the importance of freedom and autonomy as critical elements of a good life. Yet the poor so rarely get to have a sense of control over their own lives or a chance to make choices to craft their own future. Some refer to this principle as agency. So the partners came together around this idea that autonomy was a critical part of the vision of mobility that we wanted to pursue. And they also explored how often the poor are robbed of their dignity, not only by being poor, but by the very systems that we designed to meet their basic needs. So the partners decided that success means that the poor should be afforded a chance to feel belonging and the dignity that comes from being valued and seen in your own community. And this led us to this three-part definition of economic mobility. They believed that autonomy and dignity were essential also, as well as economic success. After the partnership wrapped up in 2018, the question was, what's next? What could we do in urban to help places to realize the progress against mobility goals? So in 2019, we partnered with a cross-disciplinary working group of more scholars who systematically reviewed the research evidence around the various place-based factors that research showed or strongly suggested affected long-term mobility from poverty. And I'll say that Raj's research at the time was not as far along, but that was a central piece of the underpinning, as well as work from across the academy. And they focused on factors that could be influenced by local and state policies, programs, and practices, because this framework was aimed at helping communities like Houston. And drawing from this work, and also what else Urban has done over 58 years, we came up with this framework. And I know it's very hard to read, and you each have a copy of it on your desk, I believe. And it begins with the three-part framework that I mentioned before. But it then goes on to identify 5 interconnected pillars. I'm sorry, let me step back. 5 interconnected pillars of support that were essential to achieving the 3 goals. And in short, it's rewarding work, work that pays, high-quality education, opportunity-rich, inclusive neighborhoods, a healthy environment that includes good access to health care, and responsive and just government. There is very strong overlap here between the factors that Raj's subsequent research has continued to prove influence the outcomes by neighborhood. You'll recall that he said the level of poverty, which is closely tied to whether people have access to work and whether that work pays. Both frameworks center on school quality. Raj talked a lot about social capital, which is one of the key elements we measure in opportunity-rich and inclusive neighborhoods. The only one that is not expressly represented here, which we completely agree is important, is stable family structure. And that was more because the group felt that it was harder for local policies and practices to influence that, but I suspect others may disagree. And finally, I'll just note the other thing Raj talked about beside his 4th factors was how important access to mixed income neighborhoods were, how important it was to have people to have relationships with adults and other peers who come from different backgrounds. And that's central to the opportunity-rich factors here. So these work, while they have a slightly different culture, are deeply closely related and are often used by communities in tandem. Now, for local leaders, it's fine to say these are important, but how do you know whether or not you're making progress? And so you need to have a sense of what are the intermediate conditions that we are seeking to change. So the next thing the working group did was landed on a collection of 24 predictors, and I don't see now, but thank you someone who previewed it for us yesterday. These predictors, and you can find them online and see them on your chart, and we'll talk about just a couple of them, include things like access to preschool, housing stability, health services, political participation. And they are all ones that our teams have found research suggests are closely tied to outcomes, which research suggests are closely tied to mobility. So they were grounded in trying to make implementable what we are finding from the research. Each offers local leaders a way to start monitoring a key predictor that may be important to the strategy that you are seeking. But we also note that and we'll provide some data on this, that these don't have to be the only thing that matters in place. And there may be other local data that you have access to that illuminates and gives more granular insight, particularly by neighborhood, around some of these things. So it's often these data in combination with what you have available. So the next thing we did, we really understood that it's a lot of work to gather data. So we realized that we had to turn these predictors into metrics. So for example, to measure the employment opportunities predictor, the metric was the share of adults who are employed. That's relatively straightforward. For financial security, we use the share of adults with debt in collection, which we can do at a census tract level. Now, there's no measure that's perfect, but these measures were selected to balance a range of criteria. And we're going to hear about that, I think, from Flavio later. How successfully are they, what validity does the research show as to their power for prediction? But also, how readily available is the data? Can you track it over time and see change with any consistency? And can we disaggregate it to understand the ways in which these factors are influencing different populations or not, which allows you to target remedies? So after all of that, we knew that you need to not only be able to focus on these data, but you needed to be able to measure it quickly. And it is a ton of work to pull this together for any particular place. You guys are in good shape here because you have resources with Kinder that many communities don't have. So we actually built we compiled this data and automatically update it for every county in the United States and for all cities with more than 75,000 people. And we created a data dashboard. I'm a little hair behind here. Let's get to, that's the data dashboard, which I encourage you to play with if you'd like, that allows you to look at the metrics that are most important to you. And it also presents on each of these metrics different graphs that you can use to animate and export into your own work and use to tell stories for your place. Now, it's true that smaller places or neighborhood-level data aren't available for many of these things, but we built a toolkit, which I'll discuss in a minute, that provides alternative strategies, so it helps short-circuit the process of looking for other data that can help you as well. Now, I have a variety of information I'm going to skip really quickly through just to give you a flavor of what's there. So if we start with rewarding work, let's see if I have, yeah. One of the key predictors, this allows you to look at household income by both the income percentile and race and compare jurisdictions across time. And you can dig into this in far more granular detail. Similarly, if you are looking at income, you can also see the distribution of income. So this shows you where the different percentiles of income groups grow. And what you see here is that while the highest percentiles have grown by $33,000, the bottom has only grown by $8,000. So again, it's showing you this sort of changing package. This is unique to Harris County. And then another metric that we have around living wages looks at how in each industry in a particular city or county, how well does it support the cost of living? So what you can see is that Harris County has industries that often pay above the national median for those skills, but the cost of living in Harris County is such that that wage only provides 98 cents on the dollar of what it costs for basic needs for a family. And you can dig into that data in particular sectors in your region. And then the last example I'll just show is the work around measures of debt. And this shows that you have particularly challenging issues with non-medical debt for Black communities in Harris County, which could make you decide, for example, that you want to focus in certain neighborhoods on financial security efforts that help people to avoid predatory products and help them to build and strengthen financial security. You could look at higher education. You could look at the extent of opportunity-rich neighborhoods by looking at social capital, actually Raj's data, housing security, and much more. So there are ultimately a ton of detail in here that you can use to navigate for your own community. So the other thing that we built was a toolkit to help you figure out how to go through this process. Since 2021, Urban has been providing this technical assistance to hundreds of communities, so each time we learn something about it, and we've tried to bring those experiences forward. And so the toolkit offers a roadmap that you could use to begin as a first draft for the plan that you might want to have here. But beyond the roadmap, it also includes case studies, worksheets, sample agendas for meetings, and templates that you could use for products to try to speed some of these processes. But the key elements of the roadmap, however you decide to do it, is getting started. I think today is a pretty good example of that. Building your coalition, who is willing to put in the time and the energy to be part of it. Engaging your community, understanding your conditions, hopefully the dashboard helps. Selecting strategies that you want to focus on, that'll depend on what assets you have at the table. Figuring out how you're going to measure whether you're having an impact or not. And also, and this is often ignored by these things, but I think critically important, thinking about how you're going to sustain the effort. There's always a new thing, a new initiative, another thing to do. But these aren't two-year projects that move on when the next leader comes in. So how are you going to build sustained commitment to what you're trying to do from across? So I'm going to end by doing a couple of super quick examples of how other communities have used these tools. And what I want to emphasize is that each one did it differently. And so you are going to do it differently if you decide to pursue this too. So I'm going to, this is a little bit, I'm going to just skip through the steps in this process. So Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. started an economic mobility process that was driven from the mayor's office. That has a very different culture and community when that's happening. There were other stakeholders all around the table, a lot of nonprofits, NGOs. We have a small philanthropic community, not nearly as robust as here, that participated. But it was driven from the 14 agencies that the mayor made sit down at the table. So it had a character of public program. But what they did that I thought was particularly interesting in this middle stage of identifying their priorities and strategies was they created prototypical, what they called mobility pathways. And one of those mobility pathways was designed, they're all designed around fictional people. One of them was Javier. Javier was a 26-year-old returning citizen who dreamed of owning a restaurant. And through this pathway, they started to investigate how he could begin to restabilize his life as he returned to society, how he could deal with the assets. His family owned a small home. They could use SNAP and EITC that he would be eligible for, repair his home, build equity, and eventually work with the city's entrepreneurship incubator. The point of that was that they started to investigate how all these different programs work together, what the handoff was, how well did it work, what were the eligibility criteria. And so they built a strategy by thinking of Javier. They were able to imagine what their communities, what they needed to change in order to make that system work better. And there were multiple prototypes of people that they were trying to think. That's not something that every community does, but that was a tool that worked and was compelling for them. Another example of coalition building comes from a seven-city region around Richmond, Virginia. And there was a key concern there about how working families were dealing with housing costs and the fact that people lived, often 20% of the whole population lived outside of any type of public transit. And so they used the mobility metrics for measuring progress against a regional housing plan using the data under the opportunity-rich metrics. The Richmond Rising strategy centered on ALICE. The United Way in this region was a critical player and had resources and was already pursuing an ALICE strategy. And my point here is just that not everything needs to be reinvented from whole cloth. Each plan builds on the building blocks that already exist in place. The best mobility strategies do change how decisions are made. They don't just launch a new initiative or an isolated set of programs. When they work, they increase the ROI that you get from the scarce investment in what you already have going and hopefully make it all work better together. The last example I'll bring you today is from Ramsey County, Minnesota, which is home to St. Paul. And Ramsey County, like Houston, had seen demographic shifts in recent years in its non-white population growing significantly, and with that, it lowered because they had many fewer economic opportunities in that population, it ended up with markedly worse outcomes for the residents by different measures. But and so they were really focused on how could they pull up economic opportunity for the Black and brown communities in their region. Our team thinks that the Ramsey County Coalition did three things exceptionally well. Again, every place is different. First, they took the mobility metrics and they made them work for priorities that they had already committed to as a collective. But they didn't have a way to measure them. They had said, these are our four goals. Okay. What next? And so the mobility metrics had a strong research base, and they were able to tie them to each of the objectives that they already had and used it to advance and make progress on their own strategies. The second thing they did was, these are the four priorities that they had. The second thing they did is they built a theory of change. Many are familiar with that concept. Most of your organizations have one, but they created one that worked across the whole strategy. And the power of a picture is its ability to bring other people to the table, to help them see what we were all working on together. And then the last thing they did, which is a technical thing, but they built their own community indicators project. Now, you already have great work going on at Kinder in this, but this was a set of indicators aligned to the new mobility plan. And they actually were able to take advantage. We make the programming code for the indicators that are in our dashboard available so that other researchers supporting mobility projects can actually just import that code and get a head start on the work that they're doing. I guess my point here in each of these cases is that the journey is unique to each coalition and each place. With the right strategies that are derived from the insights of the key players and the community, what's going to work in their place and in their culture. But they all have in common the North Star, a roadmap, a commitment to measurement, being evidence-based, and holding each other accountable. And the best of these take advantage of the ability to translate from the insight of great research like that from Raj into practice in your places. I think Houston is enormously well suited. I've been hearing in conversations over the last couple days that the challenge is to take the extraordinary assets that exist in this room and figure out how you organize yourselves to move forward. If any of the resources that we have built can be of assistance in the journey, then that's our reason why for being. So thanks for having me here, and good luck.
We can use that one too. So we're going to move to a little Q&A.
All right, thank you.
Yes, I think we've got a couple of mics we can roam around, and we've got a little bit of time. All right, we'll start right here.
Hi, good morning. My name is Manolo Sanchez. I'm a Houstonian, but I'm on the board of Fannie Mae. So I wanted to ask you about housing affordability as it has informed.
My husband worked there for 10 years.
Did he? Okay.
And was their regulator for another 10.
Oh my goodness, we had to compare notes after the break. But so I know it's a big topic, but you do so much work on these issues. How big is the impact for housing affordability in terms of being a kind of a binary sort of factor in the processes of evolving these communities?
I unsurprisingly think that housing is a critical, maybe in some ways one of the single most large challenges people face in the affordability crisis that we have in this country right now. Cost of living for many families, certainly the bottom half of our income spectrum, exceeds their capacity to sustain, and so much of that is driven by housing. You hear it from the Fed now, that the housing price inflation is the single largest driver of inflation that we're seeing. And there are two reasons, two things that I think are critically important. The first is housing supply. We simply have built far less of it. The rest of the world is now trying to figure out how it can liberate its regulatory and zoning processes in ways that Houston was long seen as sort of sometimes teased for its lack of zoning, but right now every place else is trying to figure out how it can create pathways through their zoning morass and overcome some of the NIMBYism that has been one of the primary constraints. But there are other constraints too. There's building permitting processes. There is just the fact that incomes for a lot of people don't support the cost of housing with land more constrained. And we have to find ways to free up church assets. We have to find ways to free up public lands that are underutilized. Houston has a lot of real estate that's not fully utilized. And so how do we unleash housing supply? That won't solve the housing problem for very low-income people because their incomes, even with public assistance, won't support sort of the cost of maintaining and building and maintaining four walls and a door, but it is an essential first step. So I think housing is critical, but you also heard Raj say where people live is critical. And if we have a history in our country of building housing for low-income people in isolated communities far from where others who have opportunity live. And we did it in many cases with intention to segregate by income and race. And that history helps to make it more difficult for us to overcome the economic mobility, and I think is a driver of the downward economic mobility. So I think housing strategies that give people access to wealth building through homeownership where they can, but also making sure that people are stably housed in places of opportunity, I always put at the top of my mobility strategy list.
Thank you. Other questions? I'm going to look over to this side of the room. I know y'all have had enough coffee. Oh, Steve.
We're coming from both corners.
Here comes
Who gets
the
to you
microphone
first?
My name's Stephen Ives. I'm with the YMCA and
Hi, Steve.
came to the city 7 years ago and have served in other urban areas of the country. You said something in your comments about how Houston is perfectly situated or uniquely situated to be able to move the needle on that. Hold up a mirror for us for a couple minutes and tell us more about what you see in us that we may not see in ourselves.
Well, first of all, Diana made sure that I'm very optimistic and upbeat about the possibilities here. So not only because she asked me to do that, did I say that. I was here for a few hours last night, and I am looking around the room and I see the institutions that are represented here. I also, as I think mentioned, I am deeply jealous. My Washington, D.C. tri-state region suffers, first of all, because we are so many small jurisdictions. We don't have the reach that Harris County and Houston have, integrated government, but also we don't have the philanthropic community. There's great wealth in this community, too, that is place-based. And so you have the opportunities with strong philanthropy, with a strong community foundation, with a business community who's at least hosting this event and I think showing a commitment. Those are all core assets. You also have Kinder, which is a strong data partner in the local region. And, you know, you are all spending your day here. And you could be doing a lot of other things. So those are the sort of assets that I see. I think there are challenges, too, undoubtedly. I haven't mined your data as closely as I have some other places that I personally know better. But the reality is that the region's great strength is its, I think, diversity. I mean, my daughter now works in a Michelin star restaurant here in town. This is a hell of a food scene, right? And that food scene is driven by an extraordinary immigrant community that is enriching the culture and economy of this city. But that diversity also creates, there are lots of segregation, as we saw in Raj's map of where people live in this community by income and race. And those places of isolation are what the data tells us are places where people don't have growth. I will say you don't have, to quite the same degree I see in other places, physical barriers in the way. I mean, there are cities in DC where I live, they literally built highways to keep those people far from our federal city. And now creating that access to opportunity is very difficult. And you also have scale, you have land. So those are some of the assets, but also some of the challenges. Did I do okay, Diana?
To the middle region. Here we go, right here.
Good morning, I'm Doug Fauché. I'm
Good morning,
with
Doug.
Good Reason Houston. You pointed out 3 examples of communities that are doing things that you think are interesting, important. Can you talk more about which communities are getting outcomes and where we might look to not just people that are doing innovative things, but innovative things that work?
I think the short answer is that it's too soon for us to be able to describe places that are getting real movement in the overall economic mobility outcomes. I actually anticipated that question and sweated about it a little bit last night. But what I think I could suggest, depending upon which outcomes you're interested in, we know what are important good housing strategies, what are important good workforce development strategies. What we need to figure out is which of those things working in consort and which strategies of collaboration yield to the movement on the mobility metrics. And honestly, most of the partnerships that I've talked about are 1, 2, 3 years old, and data isn't that, first of all, it moves very slowly, and it's not always refreshed that quickly, so it's a little hard to say yet. I wish I had a better answer for you.
Great question, especially when you think about the social capital comments that Raj talked about yesterday. We'll go back here next.
I know yesterday, I'm always trying to challenge myself about my perspective and how I view things. And I know I've made this comment twice in my notes about how do you challenge or change the middle and upper income or class sectors to truly want to invite that sector in, because if you don't have the connectiveness, if you don't have that investment, no matter what infrastructure you build, it's unlikely to be successful, or at least that's what I've observed.
I appreciate that comment very much, and I think that was something Raj was getting to at the end of his conversation, which is we all have an incentive for the health of the region to want to be able to see everybody contributing. The social cost, not only to sort of people's comfort in their place, but to what our tax dollars need to go to support, or problems that it needs to avoid. The lost economic growth from bringing other populations along. I'm part of a coalition of folks that have been thinking a lot about, there are these very large measures that say GDP gets bigger if all of our populations are contributing to the economy, and we can estimate how much we lose from the lost lives. For example, McKinsey has done this estimate of how much if the levels of performance for black families in America equaled those of whites, what would the increase in national GDP be? But the hard problem with that is that I don't experience directly a change in national GDP. I need to be able to translate that to why, I hope people do this because it's the right thing to do, but we also need to help them understand how their community and their place will be stronger and richer. And I think that's one of the reasons, I thought the Raj chart, for example, about which institutions are ones that are going to actually help to generate increases in upward mobility through higher education is really interesting, because if we can demonstrate by investment in those places a real change, then there may be other resources we don't have to spend. And that's the other question is, we always have what we call the wrong pocket problem, right? We're spending money over here, but if you do something there that saves you money, you don't get to use that savings to pay for more of the thing that actually made the difference. And collectives are how we see the relationship between those different strategies. So we're thinking a lot about how do you do storytelling that shows where those immediate to you benefits come from being in a place with better economic mobility outcomes. But I don't have a great chart on that yet.
All right, we'll come over here to Cynthia.
Is this on? Yeah. I just wondered if you had connected at all with the communities that are implementing the Circles movement, which is out of the Bridges Out of Poverty work by Ruby Payne. I mean, that's more on the micro level, right? It's working with individuals to achieve their goals for upward mobility. And the Circles, if you're not familiar with it creates a community of people that the person wouldn't normally have access to, who then lend their resources and time, et cetera, to help the person achieve their upward mobility goals. But there are communities that are already implementing this, and I think there are several perhaps faith-based communities that are doing Circles or this work. Seems like that's a good connection and a good place to start, because at least there's a lot of movement to helping people on this trajectory up.
There are 500 people who work at the Urban Institute, so the fact that I'm not personally familiar may not be evidence, but what I heard you just describe connects to a number of the drivers that we've talked about yesterday, because that model strengthens the social capital that people have access to. So we were talking yesterday about what things the evidence is proven can make a difference and which things are suggestive. To me, that model suggests something that is promising. We were, yesterday I talked to Raj afterwards, he was talking about access to middle-income adults, or he was talking about access to other people who are middle income, and I pushed a little bit. I said, what do we know about whether being in a school with your peers from a different economic class is important, or whether it's important to be with adults? And he said, kids sometimes bring their parents along and create settings where people have models and roles that they can do. But we don't know yet which of those models. But I would hypothesize from what I know, for example, about violence disruption strategies, that when there's a powerful adult in the community, or what I know about apprenticeships, that when there is an adult who takes a particular interest in that person's growth and development, those tend to be far more successful in improving long-term incomes. I find those important insights that we can at least test further and draw upon, and it all ties back to the social capital.
That's great. We have time for one quick question.
You have
I'm
one
sure-
right back there.
Let's see, I saw this hand here, so, sorry, Carolyn.
Yeah, this is a one quick question. My name is Jay Wu. So yesterday, Dr. Chetty kind of measuring economic mobility through earning and the changing earning intergenerational and intragenerational. I'm glad that you mentioned about housing as a way to accumulate wealth. So I know that the Urban Institute is working on this financial health and wealth dashboard.
Yep, that's
you know,
another
so
tool
it's like
that's
you
useful.
increase your income, but you know, still need to educate folks to understand how to accumulate wealth over time and pass that wealth intergenerationally. So can you talk a little bit about this, especially right now we have this affordability crisis? So any kind of a strategy, short-term, long-term, to help residents in this area? I mean, Houston, you know, we are fortunate we are one of the most affordable cities in United States. But still, you know, I think, you know, we'd
That's why
like
my
to
daughter
listen
moved
to,
here.
yeah, from you some strategies. Thank you.
So first of all, I live in multiple domains, but I personally am an enormous believer that very small amounts of wealth are almost a necessary precondition. I didn't talk about it, but one of the things that the DC mobility strategy used is it used a framework of make sure stability, mobility, and prosperity. And its idea is that you need a basic level of stability in order for people to be able to make the next step, which is start to invest in themselves and not just be fending day to day. And then ultimately that leads to prosperity. All of the research, I have one of my colleagues is a leader on this, shows that even a small amount of savings, hundreds of dollars in a person's bank account, can help make very big differences in that family's ability to ultimately have better long-term outcomes. And part of the reason for that is because most people don't earn $4,000 a month every single month. Income varies, especially in our current economy. And expenses vary. When your car needs a new suspension, that's a $2,000 hit. You may have, if you don't have any money in the bank account, living paycheck to paycheck, you may lose your ability to get transportation to work. And now your income becomes volatile. So volatility is one of the great impediments, in my mind, to mobility and wealth. I don't mean fourth homes. I mean a couple $100 in your savings account. That is a critical component to your ability. So I think, yes, wealth matters as well as income, but the measure we have right now of whether you have more stability, mobility, may be your income, but a key pathway to that income is increasing your access to a reasonable level of savings.
Yeah, that was an
Completely agree.
excellent last question. Thank you, Jay. And Sarah, thank you so much for your incredible insights this morning. I think you've given us a lot of tools and a lot of things to think about. So thank you
It's
very
my pleasure.
much.
I'm thrilled and excited to follow along.